Idealism had a profound impact on 19th century society. In order to capture a more complete picture of the impact of idealism, it's imperative to survey more than just the published works of the influential and powerful. There should be a closer look taken on the impact of idealism and how there developed a thirst for the radical on influencing the labor force of the Industrial Revolution, how Romanticism and nationalism found a voice in art, music, and written works in poetry and prose. Herman Harold Horn, in his 1910 book, Idealism in Education, The First Principles in the Making of Men and Women, described education as the complex relationship between a teacher and their pupil. And the purpose of education is to create an intentional atmosphere for them to interact. In his words, educating is the purposeful providing of an environment. At bottom, it is personality in and behind the environment that counts most. So educating is really a relation between personalities of different degrees of maturity. He continued, the relation between teachers and pupils being both personal and reciprocal is something more than materialism can either allow or explain, than the commercialism of trade can understand, than any form of egoism can attain. His perspective in 1910 at the close of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century shows us what people perceived coming out of the 19th century as being the impact of idealism. Ursula Howard, in her 2012 analysis of writing as a function of literacy, described the 19th century as a turbulent period. There was change coming out of the Napoleonic Wars. There was change in the shifting landscape of people and property, courtesy of the Industrial Revolution. According to her findings, the opportunities to learn how to read were proportional to the nature of the material you intended to read. If you chose to read something conservative, there was plenty of opportunities for you to practice, to learn to read. However, the learning, teaching, and practice of reading were broadly met with approval and grew fast, but there was a growing consciousness of the public's hunger to read and write radical publications. For tens of thousands of copies of Thomas Paine's Rights of Man were circulating within a few weeks of their 1791 publication. The book was banned quickly, but continued to circulate, read in secret. The creation of an undesirable reading material was one reason writing was strongly opposed, along with fears that it would enable forgery and it would encourage people's ambitions to rise above their ordained station in life. Consider how this relates to the idealisms covered in Gutek's chapter 11. Stephen Rumpf, in his critical 2004 work comparing Napoleon and Beethoven, succinctly described the people's thirst for the revolutionary when he wrote this: Beethoven, like Napoleon, was not of a generation which made the revolution, but was a product of the revolutionary age and time when the mold of tradition and custom was broken. Nothing seemed impossible in the face of reason, energy, and will. Beethoven was 18 when Bastille fell. He was a political composer, and his themes reflected the idealisms of the time. He dedicated his art to the problems of the people, their freedom, their justice, their progress. He composed on one side funeral marches that evoked the patriotic ceremonies of the French Revolution, and cantatas in praise of the enlightened reforms of Joseph II as the Holy Roman Emperor. But on the other side, he wrote ballets, like the creatures of Prometheus, that painted a utopian idealistic picture. Prometheus, who is a titan of Greek mythology, had become a Western symbol of man's drive for scientific knowledge, as well as a caution for the risks that were associated with overreaching or achieving unintended consequences. Poets, painters, and sculptors alike capture Prometheus in their work, but none so subtly or as foretelling as Mary Shelley's Gothic work, Frankenstein. Its original subtitle, A Modern Prometheus, it was clear to see her perspective of the overreaching and achieving unintended consequences of the drive for scientific knowledge. Revisiting Horn's work as a frame for society's role in the 19th century education, he describes four forces that impacted growth of children into men and women. According to Horn, the three primary forces were heredity, where you came from by birth, your environment, and your will. The fourth force was different because it was education. Horn believed education worked in cooperation with the other three primary driving forces. Consider for a moment how this perspective reflects the idealism of the time. Lionel Trilling's introduction to George Orwell's autobiographical account of his role in the Spanish-American War, Homage to Catalonia, said this: "Politics, which is presumed to be available to everyone, is a relatively new thing in the world. Ideas and ideals play a great role. Communism's record of the use of unregenerate force was perfectly clear years ago, but many of us found it impossible to admit that, because communism spoke boldly to our love of ideas and ideals. We tried as hard as we could to believe that politics might be an ideal, only to discover that what we took to be the political pastoral was really a grim military campaign, or that we insisted on calling agrarianism was in actuality a new imperialism." William Butler Yeats wrote, "Had I the heavens' embroidered claws, and wrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark claws of night and light and half-light, I would spread the claws under your feet, but I, being poor, have only my dreams. I've spread my dreams under your feet, so tread softly because you tread on my dreams." Poetry like this, music like Beethoven's, art like Picasso's and Monet's, were all reflections of the people's hope in the ideals of the time. Unfortunately, these ideals would also be the driving force for many of the wars that would come in the years to follow.